The millionaire mocked his assistant's dreams, but one kiss from her made him beg for her love. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the exact moment her dreams would be crushed. She just didn't expect it to happen on a Tuesday. The 37th floor of the Meridian Tower buzzed with the controlled chaos that only Chicago's financial district could produce. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath like a living organism of steel and ambition. But for Danica Moore, the view had long since lost its magic. She moved through the executive suite with the grace of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous waters. At 29, Danica possessed an elegance that came not from privilege, but from years of refusing to let circumstance define her worth. Her dark skin glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her hair was pulled back in a sophisticated bun that spoke of professionalism and quiet strength. More, the voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Christopher Hale stood in the doorway of his corner office, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 38, he commanded every room he entered with the kind of presence that made grown men stutter and seasoned executives second-guess themselves. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. His steel-gray eyes held the warmth of a January morning in Chicago, and his smile, when it appeared, carried the promise of swift destruction for anyone foolish enough to cross him. "Yes, Mr. Hale." Danica's voice remained steady, professional. She had mastered the art of appearing unaffected by his intimidation tactics. "The Henderson files. Where are they?" "On your desk, sir. Second stack from the left, organized by date as you requested." She didn't look up from her computer screen, fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He disappeared into his office without a word of acknowledgement, not a thank you, not even a grunt of approval, just silence. Danica exhaled slowly. 3 years. 3 years of organizing his life, managing his schedule, deflecting his sarcasm, and pretending that his complete lack of basic human decency didn't chip away at her soul piece by piece. The other assistants in the building often asked her how she did it, how she survived working for the Ice King of corporate America, the man who had fired 3 assistants before her for crimes as heinous as bringing him the wrong coffee or daring to suggest a more efficient filing system. But Danica had something they didn't, a vision of something bigger than survival. Every morning when she walked through those glass doors, she carried with her the dream of opening her own consulting firm. She had notebooks filled with business plans, spreadsheets mapping out financial projections, and a burning desire to prove that she was more than just the woman who organized Christopher Hale's calendar. The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. "Christopher Hale's office, this is Danica." "Danica, honey, it's your sister. Quick question. Did you submit that business loan application yet?" Danica glanced toward Christopher's office, lowering her voice. "Kimberly, I can't talk about this now. When can you talk about it? You've been saying not now for 6 months. The bank won't wait forever, and neither will your dreams." Before Danica could respond, Christopher's door swung open with unnecessary force. "Moore, my office now." She ended the call quickly and gathered her notepad, following him into the pristine sanctuary he called an office. Everything was sharp edges and cold surfaces, glass, steel, and leather in shades of black and grey. Even the single plant in the corner looked like it was afraid to show too much color. Christopher settled behind his desk like a king claiming his throne. "The Morrison account is requesting changes to their portfolio structure. I need you to call them and explain why their request is financially idiotic." "Of course, sir. Would you like me to use those exact words?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, tinged with just enough sarcasm to be dangerous. His eyes snapped to hers, a flash of something unreadable crossing his features. "Excuse me?" Danica felt her heart skip, but she didn't back down. 3 years of swallowed words had finally found their voice. "I meant, would you prefer I use more diplomatic language when explaining the market realities to Mr. Morrison?" For a moment the air crackled with tension. Christopher leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. "You know what your problem is, Moore." His voice was silk wrapped around steel. "You think too much, you feel too much, you dream too much." The words hit her like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. "And what exactly is wrong with dreaming, Mr. Hale?" The question hung in the air like a challenge neither of them was prepared for. "Have you ever worked for someone who constantly crushed your dreams?" Danica is about to find out if it's worth fighting for her goals. Even when it means facing Chicago's most feared boss. What would you do in her place? Would you submit to silence or find the courage to respond? Sometimes the most dangerous moments come disguised as ordinary conversations. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, and Danica realized she had just asked the one question Christopher Hale was never prepared to answer. His steel-gray eyes narrowed, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Dreams," he repeated slowly, the word dripping with disdain, "are luxuries for people who can afford to fail. You work for me more. That should be dream enough." But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Where there had once been the predictable dance of boss and subordinate, now there was something rawer, a crack in his perfectly constructed armor. Danica felt heat rise in her chest, 3 years of swallowed pride finally finding its voice. "With respect, Mr. Hale, working for you pays my bills. It doesn't fulfill my soul." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had crossed a line. Christopher's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his desk. "Your soul?" His laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Let me tell you something about souls, Moore. They're expensive luxuries that most of us can't afford. You want to know what I think about dreams? They're pretty lies we tell ourselves before reality crushes them into dust." Danica stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Maybe that's your reality, sir, but it doesn't have to be mine." For a heartbeat, something flickered across Christopher's features, surprise, perhaps even respect. But it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Get out," he said quietly, too quietly, "and close the door behind you." Danica walked out on legs that felt like water, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the woman beneath. She settled at her desk, hands trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. Through the glass walls of his office, she could see Christopher standing with his back to her, staring out at the Chicago skyline. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose she recognized as his thinking position. But there was something different about his stance today, a tension that spoke of internal warfare. The morning crawled by with suffocating politeness. Christopher issued orders through email rather than calling her into his office. When clients arrived, he barely acknowledged her introductions. The easy rhythm of their professional relationship had been replaced by something electric and unpredictable. At lunch, Danica escaped to the small cafe on the 22nd floor, desperate for air that didn't taste of tension. She was picking at a salad she had no appetite for when a familiar voice made her look up. "Mind if I sit?" Lydia Carver, one of the senior marketing executives, slid into the opposite chair without waiting for permission. At 45, Lydia had the kind of sharp intelligence that had carved her path through the corporate jungle, leaving behind a trail of impressed competitors and grateful mentees. "You look like someone who just poked a sleeping dragon," Lydia observed, unwrapping her sandwich with practiced efficiency. Danica managed a weak smile. "Something like that." "Let me guess. The Ice King finally pushed one button too many." Lydia's dark eyes sparkled with knowing amusement. "I've been watching you handle Christopher Hale for 3 years, Danica. You're the only assistant who's lasted longer than 6 months. And frankly, you're the only person in this building who doesn't cower when he walks into a room. Maybe I should have learned to cower." "Maybe," Lydia agreed, taking a thoughtful bite. "Or maybe he finally met his match." Danica looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Christopher Hale has built his entire identity around being untouchable, unreachable. But you—" Lydia leaned forward conspiratorially. "You're the first person I've ever seen who doesn't seem impressed by his fortress of indifference. I need this job, Lydia. I know you do. But you also need to remember who you are underneath that professional exterior." Lydia's voice grew gentle. "Don't let his coldness freeze your fire, honey. The world needs more women who refuse to dim their light for men who've forgotten how to appreciate brightness." Back on the 37th floor, the afternoon brought a parade of meetings and phone calls that should have returned them to familiar ground. But Danica found herself hyper-aware of Christopher's presence, the way his voice carried through the glass walls, the sharp click of his shoes on the marble floor, the rare moments when his laughter emerged like broken glass. Around 4 o'clock, her computer chimed with an email marked urgent. Her heart sank as she recognized the sender, Thornfield and Associates, the bank handling her business loan application. "Ms. Moore, we require additional documentation for your loan application. Please schedule an appointment this week to discuss your financial projections and business model. Time sensitive." She stared at the screen, calculating. The meeting would have to be during work hours. There was no way around it. She would have to ask Christopher for time off, which meant admitting that she was actively planning to leave his employment. The irony wasn't lost on her. This morning, she had defended her right to dream. Now she would have to prove she had the courage to chase those dreams, even if it meant professional suicide. A soft knock on Christopher's office door felt like signing her own death warrant. "Come in." He was reviewing contracts, his dark head bent over legal documents that represented millions of dollars in deals. The late afternoon sun, streaming through the windows, caught the silver threads in his hair, a reminder that beneath the corporate armor was a man who had lived, suffered, and built walls high enough to keep the world at bay. "Mr. Hale, I need to request a few hours off this Friday morning. I have a personal appointment that couldn't be scheduled outside work hours." He looked up slowly, his grey eyes unreadable. Personal appointment. It wasn't a question, but Danica felt compelled to elaborate anyway. "Yes, sir. It's important." Christopher set down his pen with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Let me guess more. Someone finally convinced you that your dreams are worth pursuing." The words hung between them like a challenge that would change everything. When the hunter becomes the hunted, even the strongest walls begin to crumble. The question hit Danica like a physical blow, and she felt the color drain from her face. Christopher's grey eyes bore into hers with the intensity of a man who had built his empire on reading people's weaknesses, and he was reading hers now like an open book. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she managed, but her voice betrayed her with the slightest tremor. Christopher rose from his chair with predatory grace, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. "Don't." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't lie to me more. I can smell desperation from a mile away, and you reek of someone who's about to jump ship." Danica lifted her chin, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "And if I am? Would that surprise you so much?" "Surprise me?" Christopher's laugh was hollow. "No, disappoint me. That's something else entirely." The admission hung between them like a confession neither had expected. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, revealing something raw and almost vulnerable, but then his features hardened again, the CEO reclaiming control from the man. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years you've been the only person in this building who could anticipate my needs, handle my moods, and keep this operation running smoothly. And now you want to throw it all away for what? Some pipe dream about running your own business? How did you... Danica started, then stopped herself. Of course he knew. Christopher Hale didn't survive in corporate America by being oblivious to what his employees were planning. "I make it my business to know everything about the people I depend on." His eyes never left hers. "Thornfield and Associates, business loan application consulting firm specializing in organizational efficiency." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Did you really think you could plan your escape without me noticing?" Heat flashed through Danica's chest, anger, embarrassment, and something dangerously close to betrayal. "My personal life is exactly that. Personal. Not when it affects my business." Christopher stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You want to know what disappoints me most more? It's not that you're planning to leave, it's that you don't think you're already exactly where you belong." The words hit her like a slap, and she felt tears prick her eyes, tears of frustration, of 3 years of unspoken appreciation, of dreams that felt simultaneously too big and too small. "Where I belong?" Her voice rose slightly. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be invisible? To organize your entire world? To know your preferences better than you know them yourself? To watch you succeed using strategies I suggested, and never, not once, hear you acknowledge that I'm anything more than a highly efficient piece of office equipment?" Christopher went very still. "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know." The words poured out now, 3 years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. "I've watched you charm clients, inspire loyalty from your executives, even show kindness to the cleaning crew. But me, I get orders barked through email and the occasional grunt of approval when I've exceeded your impossible standards." Something shifted in Christopher's expression, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like pain. "You want acknowledgement." His voice was quieter now, rougher. "You want to know what you mean to this company, to..." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "You're irreplaceable, Moore, completely irreplaceable, and the thought of losing you to some half-baked business venture makes me want to burn down every bank in Chicago." Danica stared at him, speechless. This was not the Christopher Hale she knew. The cold, calculating CEO who viewed employees as expendable resources. This was a man whose carefully constructed walls were showing cracks, and she wasn't sure which version frightened her more. "Then why?" she whispered. "Do you treat me like I don't matter?" The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He turned away, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she'd never seen from him before, one that spoke of vulnerability and uncertainty. "Because," he said finally, his back still turned, "mattering is dangerous." The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. When he turned back to face her, his expression was carefully neutral again, but his eyes held ghosts. "Take your Friday appointment," he said abruptly, "but when you come back I want a full report on exactly what this business plan of yours entails. If you're determined to destroy your career, the least I can do is make sure you're not doing it blindly." Danica blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "Sir, I don't understand. Thornfield and Associates are sharks, Moore. They'll tear apart any proposal that isn't bulletproof." His voice had returned to its familiar professional tone, but something warmer lingered underneath. "If you're going to walk into that meeting, you're going to be prepared. I won't have it said that my assistant didn't know how to properly structure a business plan. You're helping me leave." Christopher moved back to his desk, shuffling papers with unnecessary precision. "I'm protecting my investment. 3 years of training, you wasn't cheap." But Danica saw the truth he was trying to hide, the way his hands weren't quite steady, the muscle jumping in his jaw, the careful way he avoided meeting her eyes. "Christopher," she said softly, using his first name for the first time in 3 years. He froze. Don't what? Don't make this more complicated than it already is." He looked up then, and for a split second she saw him completely unguarded, a man who had spent so long building walls that he'd forgotten how to find the doors. And in that moment, Danica realized the most dangerous truth of all. She wasn't the only one who was afraid to dream. Some truths can only survive in darkness. Friday morning came wrapped in Chicago's signature autumn chill, and Danica found herself standing outside the imposing glass facade of Thornfield and Associates with a leather portfolio that felt heavier than it should. Inside were business plans that had consumed her nights for months, financial projections that represented hope distilled into numbers, and dreams that suddenly felt both precious and fragile. The meeting had been brutal. Jasper Thornfield, a man whose smile could foreclose on someone's future, had dissected her proposal with surgical precision, every weakness exposed, every optimistic projection challenged, every assumption questioned, until she felt like a fraud in a suit that cost more than she could afford. "Ms. Moore," he had said with practiced sympathy, "your concept has merit, but your financial foundation is ambitious. We'll need to see more concrete backing before we can move forward." More backing. Always more backing, as if dreams could be collateralized like real estate. Now at nearly 10 p.m. she sat alone in the empty office, the city lights blinking like distant stars beyond the windows. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. Everyone except the man whose office light still glowed behind frosted glass. She should go home, should retreat to her small apartment and lick her wounds in private. Instead, she found herself walking toward his office, drawn by something she couldn't name. Christopher was hunched over his computer, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of a man who hadn't always lived behind a desk. The harsh glow of the screen carved shadows across his face, making him look younger and somehow more human. "The meeting didn't go well," she said from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "Moore, I thought you'd gone home." "So did I." She stepped into his office, noting the empty coffee cup, the scattered papers, the way his usually perfect hair was mussed from running his hands through it. "What are you still doing here?" "The Yamamoto deal. They're threatening to pull out over contract terms." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "But that's not why you're here." Danica moved to the window, looking out at the city that had always felt full of possibilities, and tonight felt full of locked doors. "They want more backing, more proof that I'm worth the risk." "How much more?" "Enough that I'd have to put up my apartment as collateral." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny how dreams cost exactly what you can't afford to lose. Christopher was quiet for a long moment. When she turned back to him, he was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something that might have been tenderness if she didn't know him better. "You know," he said quietly, "I wasn't always like this." The admission hung in the air like a secret. Danica found herself moving closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "What were you like?" "Stupid." The word came out harsh, self-recriminating. I was 26 when I started this company. Had big dreams about changing the world, making business more human, more ethical. He laughed bitterly. I believed in people, trusted them, thought loyalty was a two-way street. What changed? Christopher's jaw tightened. My business partner, Reginald Thorne. We'd been friends since college, built this company from nothing. I trusted him with everything, my money, my vision, my future. He paused, staring at his hands. Turns out he was selling company secrets to our biggest competitor. When I confronted him, you know what he said? That I was too soft, too trusting, that in business, you eat or get eaten. Danica felt something twist in her chest. What did you do? I bought him out, rebuilt the company from scratch, and I made myself a promise, never again would I let anyone close enough to destroy what I'd built. His eyes met hers. Emotions are liabilities, Moore. They make you weak, make you vulnerable. Is that why you push everyone away? The question seemed to surprise him. I don't. You do. She moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. You're brilliant, Christopher. You could inspire incredible loyalty if you let people see who you really are. But instead you keep everyone at arm's length with sarcasm and intimidation. It's safer. For who? The question hit its mark. Christopher looked away, but not before she caught a glimpse of something raw and unguarded. You want to know the truth? His voice was barely above a whisper. Watching you plan to leave. It's killing me, and I have no right to feel that way. You're my employee. You deserve better than this place, better than... He stopped himself. Better than what? Better than wasting your life working for a man who's forgotten how to be human. The words broke something open in Danica's chest. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing against his hand where it rested on the desk. He didn't pull away. You haven't forgotten, she said softly. You're just scared. Terrified, he corrected, his eyes finding hers again. Do you know how many times I've wanted to tell you that you're brilliant, that your ideas have saved this company millions, that I look forward to Monday mornings because it means you'll be here? Danica's breath caught. Christopher, I've built my entire identity around not needing anyone, and then you walked into my life with your quiet strength and your stubborn optimism, and suddenly, he turned his hand palm up, his fingers intertwining with hers. Suddenly I can't imagine existing without you. The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they had the courage to cross. Danica felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the weight of 3 years of unspoken tension finally finding its voice. Then don't let me go, she whispered. Christopher's grip on her hand tightened. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I'm your boss. Because you deserve dreams bigger than being trapped in my frozen world. Because you're afraid, she finished for him. He nodded, the admission costing him. Because I'm afraid that if I let myself need you, and you leave anyway, it will destroy me completely. And in that moment, Danica realized that the most powerful man in Chicago was just a scared boy who had learned too young that love was another word for betrayal. Sometimes the greatest risk is the one you don't take. The weekend passed like a fever dream. Danica found herself replaying every moment of Friday night, the way Christopher's fingers had felt intertwined with hers, the raw honesty in his voice, the way he'd looked at her like she was both his salvation and his destruction. She'd left his office without another word, the weight of his confession hanging between them like an unfinished symphony. Monday morning arrived grey and uncertain, Chicago's skyline shrouded in October mist. Danica stood before her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer for the 3rd time, trying to steel herself for whatever version of Christopher would be waiting behind his office door. Would he pretend Friday night never happened? Would he regret the vulnerability he'd shown? Or worse, would he fire her to avoid the complication she represented? The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, she was surprised to find a coffee cup waiting on her desk. Not her usual morning routine, but something far more expensive. Beside it lay a single white envelope with her name written in Christopher's precise handwriting. Inside, a business card. Vivian Cross, Senior Partner, Crossbridge Capital. On the back, a note in his familiar script. She specializes in high-potential startups. I've taken the liberty of scheduling you a meeting. 2 p.m. today. Danica stared at the card, her heart hammering. Crossbridge Capital was legendary. They'd funded some of the most successful companies in the country. Getting a meeting there typically required months of networking and connections she didn't possess. But Christopher had opened a door she couldn't have reached alone. More. She looked up to find him standing in his office doorway, impeccably dressed as always, but with something different in his posture, a tension that spoke of sleepless nights and internal battles. "Thank you," she said quietly, holding up the business card. "But why?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because you were right. Your dreams deserve better backing than Thornfield could offer. That's not what I meant, and you know it." For a moment, something flickered across his features. Vulnerability, longing, fear all tangled together. Then his professional mask slid back into place. "We have the Morrison contract review at 10. I'll need those projections ready in an hour." The dismissal was clear, but Danica wasn't ready to let him retreat. Not after Friday night. Not after he'd shown her the man beneath the armor. "Christopher, we need to talk about—" "No." The word came out sharp, final. "We don't." What happened Friday was a moment of weakness. Nothing more. The words hit her like physical blows, but she saw the truth he was trying to hide, the way his hands clenched at his sides, the muscle jumping in his jaw, the careful distance he maintained between them. A moment of weakness? Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you call honesty?" "I call it a mistake." He stepped back into his office. "One that won't happen again." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed him. They held the same hunger, the same desperate longing that had colored his voice in the darkness of Friday night. He was lying. To her, to himself, to the carefully constructed world he'd built around his heart. The morning crawled by with excruciating politeness. Christopher issued orders through emails, conducted meetings with his usual efficient coldness, and avoided looking at her directly. It was as if Friday night had been erased from existence, except for the business card that burned like a secret in her pocket. At 1:45 p.m., Danica found herself standing outside the sleek offices of Crossbridge Capital, her portfolio clutched in hands that refused to stop trembling. The meeting with Vivian Cross had been everything she'd dreamed of and more. The woman was sharp, intuitive, and genuinely excited about Danica's vision for organizational consulting. "Your concept is exactly what the market needs," Vivian had said, her silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "We're prepared to offer full backing, contingent on one condition." Danica's heart had skipped. "What condition?" "We need you to start immediately. Full commitment. No safety nets." Vivian's smile had been both encouraging and challenging. "Dreams require complete faith, Ms. Moore. Half measures build half lives." Now riding the elevator back to the 37th floor, Danica felt the weight of possibility and terror in equal measure. Success was within reach. Real, tangible success that would transform her life completely. All she had to do was say yes. The office was quieter than usual for a Monday afternoon. Through Christopher's glass walls, she could see him on a conference call, his face animated as he negotiated what looked like a complex deal. This was his element, the corporate battlefield where he reigned supreme. Watching him work, she understood why he'd built such formidable walls around his heart. In his world, showing weakness meant losing everything. At 6 p.m., the office began to empty. Danica lingered at her desk, organizing files and pretending she wasn't waiting for the inevitable conversation that would determine both their futures. How did it go? She looked up to find Christopher standing beside her desk, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, the same vulnerable posture he'd worn Friday night, but his eyes were carefully guarded now. "They offered me everything." The words came out steadier than she felt. "Full backing, no conditions except—" She paused, meeting his gaze. "Except complete commitment. I have to start immediately." Something flickered across his features, pain so brief she might have imagined it. "Congratulations. I told you Vivian would see your potential. Christopher, you should take it." His voice was carefully neutral. "It's what you've worked for." "Is it what you want me to do?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. For a heartbeat, she saw him completely unguarded. Saw the man who was terrified of being abandoned again, who would rather push her away than risk the devastation of losing her. "What I want," he said quietly, "doesn't matter. This is your life, Moore. Your choice." But his eyes were pleading with her to stay, even as his words urged her to go. The contradiction was breaking her heart. "What if I don't want to choose?" she whispered. "What if there's a third option?" Christopher stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, could smell the cologne that had haunted her dreams all weekend. "There's no middle ground here, Danica." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a goodbye. "Either you stay and remain trapped in my frozen world, or you go and build the life you deserve." "And what about us?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, hanging in the air like a challenge neither of them was prepared for. Christopher's answer would change everything if he had the courage to give it. The most dangerous words are the ones we're too afraid to say. Christopher stared at her for what felt like eternity, the question hanging between them like a fragile thing that might shatter at the slightest touch. His grey eyes held storms, desire warring with terror, longing battling self-preservation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There is no us more." The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to push her away before she could get close enough to destroy him. But Danica saw the lie for what it was, a desperate man's last defense against the one thing that terrified him more than failure: love. "Look me in the eye and say that again." Christopher's jaw clenched. "Danica, no, look at me." She stood up, moving around her desk until she was close enough to see the pain he was trying so hard to hide. "Look me in the eye and tell me that Friday night meant nothing. Tell me that your hands weren't shaking when you touched mine. Tell me that you don't think about me every night when you're alone in that empty penthouse of yours. Stop." The word came out strangled. "Tell me that you don't love me." The admission hung in the air like a gunshot. Christopher went completely still, his face draining of color. For a moment she thought she'd pushed too far, crossed a line that would destroy whatever fragile connection they'd built. Then something broke in his expression, a dam finally giving way after years of pressure. "Of course I love you," he said, the words ripped from somewhere deep in his chest. "I've loved you for 2 years, 11 months, and 16 days. I've loved you through every sarcastic comment, every cold dismissal, every moment I convinced myself I was protecting us both by keeping you at arm's length." Danica felt her breath catch. "Christopher, but love isn't enough." His voice cracked on the words. "Love is what made me trust Reginald. Love is what blinded me to his betrayal. Love is what nearly destroyed me when he walked away with half my company and all my faith in human nature." He turned away from her, running shaking hands through his hair. "You want to know why I push everyone away? Because the people we love have the power to annihilate us, and I won't survive losing you the way I lost him. I'm not Reginald." "No," he said quietly. "You're worse. He only had access to my business. You could destroy my soul." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in Danica's chest. She reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Take the job, Danica. Build your company. Live the life you've dreamed of. Just don't ask me to watch you outgrow this place. Don't ask me to smile and pretend it doesn't kill me every time you realize you're too good for what I can offer. What if I don't want to outgrow this place?" The words came out fierce, determined. "What if I don't want the job?" Christopher's head snapped up. "Don't be ridiculous. This is everything you've worked for. Everything I thought I worked for." She stepped closer, and this time he didn't retreat. "But what if I was wrong? What if what I really want has been right in front of me for 3 years? Danica, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "I've spent so long focusing on escaping this place that I forgot to ask myself what I'd be escaping to. A life without you in it? That's not freedom, Christopher. That's exile." His eyes closed, and she felt him lean into her touch, despite himself. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly. I'm saying I choose you. I'm saying that maybe my dreams were never about leaving. Maybe they were about staying and fighting for something worth having." "And what happens when you change your mind? When you wake up one morning and realize you sacrificed your future for a man who doesn't know how to love without destroying what he touches?" The pain in his voice was devastating. Danica realized she wasn't just fighting for their relationship. She was fighting for his ability to believe he deserved love at all. "Then I'll prove you wrong," she said simply. "Every day, for as long as it takes." Before he could protest, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when his arms came up to wrap around her, when he kissed her back with 3 years of suppressed longing, it became something else entirely. A promise, a claiming, a leap of faith into the unknown. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Christopher rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "This is insane," he whispered. "Probably. It could ruin everything, or it could save everything." He pulled back to look at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his expression was completely unguarded. "I don't know how to do this, Danica. I don't know how to love someone without pushing them away." "Then learn. We'll figure it out together. What about your dreams? Your company?" Danica smiled. the weight of certainty settling over her like a warm blanket. My dreams are changing. Maybe instead of running from this place, I help you transform it. Maybe we build something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Christopher searched her face, looking for doubt, for signs that she would regret this choice. Instead, he found the same quiet strength that had drawn him to her from the beginning, the strength that had made her stay when every other assistant had fled, that had made her fight for her dreams, even when he'd mocked them. "You're sure?" His voice was rough with hope and terror in equal measure. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her again then, deeper this time, with the desperation of a man who had been drowning and finally found air. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said. The words no longer a confession, but a celebration. "God help us both, but I love you so much it terrifies me." And for the first time in years, Christopher Hale allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to mean destruction. Love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes it just gives you something worth fighting for. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing night in Christopher's office, and Danica was learning that love in the real world was far more complicated than love in stolen moments. The man who had whispered his devotion to her in the darkness was still learning how to show it in the harsh fluorescent light of day. "The quarterly reports need to be restructured," Christopher said during their morning briefing, his tone carefully professional despite the fact that his fingers had traced her face just hours earlier in the quiet of his penthouse. "And the Henderson account is requesting a face-to-face meeting." Danica nodded, making notes, acutely aware of the other executives around the conference table. They'd agreed to keep their relationship private until they figured out how to navigate the professional implications, but the secrecy was wearing on both of them. Later, as the meeting dispersed, Lydia Carver lingered by the conference room door, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're glowing," she observed quietly, falling into step beside Danica as they walked toward the elevator bank. "I'm sorry. That look, I've seen it before." Lydia's smile was knowing. "Someone's been getting very good news lately." Danica felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Honey, I've been in corporate America for 20 years. I know the difference between professional satisfaction and personal fulfillment." Lydia's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I know that Christopher Hale has been walking around here like a man who's discovered the sun rises in the east." Before Danica could respond, the elevator arrived, and they stepped inside with several other employees. The conversation died, but Lydia's knowing look remained. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the 37th floor. Danica looked up from her computer to see a woman she didn't recognize standing before her desk, tall, blonde, and wearing the kind of effortless elegance that came with unlimited resources. "I'm here to see Christopher," the woman announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted without explanation. "Do you have an appointment, Mrs. Ashford?" Celeste Ashford. The name was delivered like it should mean something. "And no, I don't have an appointment, but trust me, he'll want to see me." Something in the woman's tone set off alarm bells in Danica's mind, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "I'll check with Mr. Hale to see if he's available." She picked up the phone, but before she could dial, Christopher's office door opened. He stepped out, saw Celeste, and went completely still. The color drained from his face, and for a moment he looked like a man seeing a ghost. "Hello, Christopher," Celeste said, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Miss me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Danica watched Christopher's face transform, shutting down in a way she hadn't seen since their early days working together. Whatever history these two shared, it was complicated and painful. "Celeste," his voice was carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Business, darling, what else?" She moved past Danica's desk without another glance, heading straight for his office. "Shall we discuss it privately?" Christopher's eyes met Danica's for a split second, and she saw something that made her stomach drop. Not guilt, but a kind of resigned dread, like a man walking toward his own execution. They disappeared into his office, the glass door closing behind them with an ominous click. Through the frosted walls, Danica could see their silhouettes, Celeste gesturing animatedly, Christopher standing rigid as stone. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The voices behind the glass rose and fell, occasionally sharp enough to pierce the barrier, but never clear enough to understand. Danica tried to focus on her work, but concentration was impossible when every fiber of her being was straining to understand what was happening in that room. Finally, the door opened. Celeste emerged first, her expression triumphant in a way that made Danika's blood run cold. "Think about my offer, Christopher," she said loud enough for half the floor to hear. "You know I always get what I want in the end." She walked past Danika's desk, pausing just long enough to deliver a smile that was pure poison. "You must be the new assistant. How quaint." The dismissal was clear, devastating in its casual cruelty. Danica felt heat rise in her chest, but before she could respond, Celeste was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and implied threats. Christopher stood in his doorway, looking like a man who had been to war and lost. His face was pale, his jaw tight with tension she could feel from across the room. "Mr. Hale?" She kept her voice professional, aware of the curious glances from other employees. "Cancel my afternoon appointments," he said quietly. "All of them." He retreated into his office, closing the door with deliberate care. Through the glass, she watched him sink into his chair, head in his hands like a man carrying the weight of the world. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in tense silence. Christopher didn't emerge from his office, didn't answer his phone, didn't respond to emails. As 6 o'clock approached and the office began to empty, Danica found herself alone with her fears and 1,000 unanswered questions. At 7, she knocked on his door. "Come in." Christopher was standing at his window, staring out at the Chicago skyline as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, his usual perfect composure nowhere to be found. "Who is she?" Danica asked quietly. His laugh was bitter. "Someone I thought I'd left in the past." "Christopher, talk to me. What did she want?" He turned then, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "Everything. She wants everything. I don't understand. Celeste is my ex-fiancée." The words came out like he was pulling them from somewhere deep and wounded. "We were together for 2 years. I thought she loved me, thought we were building a life together. Turns out she was building an exit strategy." Danica felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "She left me 3 days before our wedding, took $500,000 from our joint account and disappeared with my closest competitor. Said I was too cold, too controlling, too damaged to love properly." The confession hung between them like a weapon. Danica realized she was looking at the wound that had created the man she'd fallen in love with. The betrayal that had taught him love was just another word for destruction. "Why is she here now?" Christopher's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Because she needs something. Her company is failing. Her marriage fell apart, and she's desperate." He moved to his desk, picking up a folder with hands that weren't quite steady. "She wants me to buy her out. Wants me to save her from the mess she made of her life. And she's threatening to make things very public if I don't. Our history, my reasons for never marrying, my difficulties with relationships." His eyes met hers. "She knows exactly how to destroy me, Danica, and she's not above using that knowledge." The implications crashed over Danica like a wave. "She knows about us. She suspects, and if she confirms it..." Christopher's voice trailed off, but the threat was clear. A public scandal involving their relationship could destroy both their careers, could paint Danica as just another ambitious assistant sleeping her way to the top. "What are you going to do?" Christopher was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man making an impossible choice. "I'm going to give her what she wants." And Danica realized that sometimes love's greatest enemy isn't doubt or fear, it's the ghosts that refuse to stay buried. Sometimes the person you need to save someone from is themselves. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Danica stared at Christopher. Watching him retreat behind walls she thought they'd torn down together. In the span of one afternoon, Celeste Ashford had managed to undo weeks of progress, reducing the man she loved to the frightened, defensive version of himself she'd first met 3 years ago. "No?" Christopher looked up, startled by the quiet authority in her voice. "Excuse me?" I said no. Danica moved closer, her dark eyes blazing with a determination that would have been intimidating if he didn't know her so well. "You're not giving her what she wants. You're not sacrificing us to appease a ghost. Danica, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was steady, controlled, but underneath was steel. "I understand that you're scared. I understand that she hurt you so badly, you've spent years believing you don't deserve love. But I won't stand here and watch you hand our future over to a woman who abandoned you when things got difficult." Christopher's jaw tightened. "This isn't about us. This is about protecting you. If she goes public with allegations about our relationship, let her." The words came out fierce, final. "Let her tell the world that the Ice King of corporate America fell in love with his assistant. Let her expose every intimate detail of our relationship, if it makes her feel powerful. You don't know what you're saying. Christopher stood up, running agitated hands through his hair. The media would tear you apart. They'd paint you as nothing more than an opportunist who slept her way into my bed. And you think I care what strangers think about my choices? Danica stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. Christopher, I've spent my entire life being underestimated, dismissed and reduced to assumptions about what a black woman in corporate America must be willing to do to get ahead. If Celeste wants to add her voice to that chorus, she's welcome to it. I won't let her destroy your reputation. My reputation isn't yours to protect. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she saw him flinch. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be shielded from the consequences of loving you. I'm a grown woman who made a choice with her eyes wide open. Christopher turned away, staring out at the city lights that twinkled like false promises below. You don't know her like I do. Celeste doesn't make idle threats. She'll find ways to hurt you that you can't even imagine. Then we'll face them together. Danica moved behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. She felt the tension there, the weight of old wounds and new fears. That's what people who love each other do. They fight for each other, not run from each other. What if I can't protect you? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. She turned him to face her, framing his face with her hands the way she had that first night they'd kissed. I don't need you to protect me, Christopher. I need you to trust me. Trust us. Trust that what we have is strong enough to survive whatever she throws at us. For a moment she saw him waver, saw hope and fear battle in his grey eyes. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. I can't risk it. I won't risk you. He stepped back from her touch. I'm meeting with her tomorrow. I'll give her the buyout she wants, and she'll disappear back to whatever life she's built for herself. And what about the life we're building? The question hung between them like an accusation. Christopher's silence was answer enough. I see. Danica's voice was carefully controlled, but he could hear the hurt underneath. So when things get difficult, your solution is to throw money at the problem and hope it goes away, just like you've done your whole life. That's not fair. Isn't it? She crossed her arms, and for the first time since they'd confessed their love, she looked at him like he was a stranger. You did it with Reginald when he betrayed you, bought him out instead of fighting for your company. You've done it with every relationship since, keeping people at arm's length so you never have to risk real intimacy, and now you're doing it with us. Christopher's face went pale. I'm trying to protect what we have. No, you're trying to control it. You're so terrified of being hurt again that you'd rather destroy something beautiful than risk fighting for it. Tears gathered in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. That's not love, Christopher. That's cowardice. The word hit him like a physical blow. His eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Cowardice? I'm giving up everything to keep you safe, and you call it cowardice? You're giving up without a fight because you're afraid she might win. Danica stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. But here's what you don't understand. She's already won if you let her drive us apart. She doesn't need to expose our relationship or destroy our reputations. All she had to do was walk through that door and watch you choose fear over love. The truth of her words seemed to hit him like cold water. Christopher stared at her, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how thoroughly Celeste had manipulated him, with nothing more than implied threats and old wounds. God, he whispered. You're right. Of course I'm right. Some of the steel went out of Danica's voice, replaced by the warmth he'd fallen in love with. I know you, Christopher Hale, better than she ever did, better than you know yourself sometimes, and the man I love doesn't run from fights. He wins them. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically see him restructuring his entire approach to the problem. When he looked at her again, there was something different in his eyes. Not the frightened, defensive posture of a man protecting his wounds, but the calculating intelligence of a predator who had remembered how to hunt. She made one critical mistake, he said slowly. What's that? She assumed I was still the same broken man she left at the altar. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But I'm not. I have something worth fighting for now. I have you. Danica felt her heart skip. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Celeste Ashford is about to learn why I didn't become one of Chicago's most successful CEOs by backing down from bullies. Christopher moved to his desk, pulling out files with the focused energy she recognized from his most complex business negotiations. She wants to play games? Fine. But she's forgotten that I wrote the rule book. What can I do to help? Christopher looked up at her, and for the first time since Celeste had walked through that door, he looked like the man who had whispered his love to her in the darkness. Help me remind her why crossing us was the biggest mistake of her life. And Danica realized that sometimes love doesn't conquer all by itself. Sometimes it just gives you the courage to fight for everything that matters. The most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. The next morning arrived with the crisp promise of autumn in Chicago, and Danica found herself in Christopher's penthouse at dawn, surrounded by legal documents, financial reports, and the kind of strategic planning that had built empires and destroyed kingdoms. "She's leveraged to the hilt," Christopher said, pointing to a spreadsheet that painted a devastating picture of Celeste's financial situation. 3 failed business ventures, a divorce that cost her half her assets and creditors circling like vultures. She's not just desperate, she's drowning. Danica studied the documents spread across his dining table, her analytical mind cataloging every weakness, every vulnerability. So the buyout isn't about revenge, it's about survival. Exactly, which means she's predictable. Christopher's smile was sharp with anticipation. Desperate people make desperate choices, and desperate choices leave trails. His phone buzzed with a text message. Christopher glanced at it, his expression hardening. "She's moved up the meeting. Wants to see me this afternoon instead of tomorrow. She's panicking." Good, panic makes people sloppy. He gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. "I need you to contact Nathaniel Graves at Morrison & Associates. Tell him I need a forensic accountant and a private investigator, and I need them both by noon." "Christopher," Danica caught his hand as he reached for his jacket. "Are you sure about this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back." His grey eyes met hers, and she saw none of the fear that had haunted him yesterday. Instead, there was a cold determination that reminded her why he'd survived in the cutthroat world of corporate America. "She made this a war when she threatened you," he said quietly. "I'm just choosing the battlefield." 3 hours later, the 37th floor of the Meridian Tower had been transformed into a command center. Nathaniel Graves, a forensic accountant who looked like he could find corruption in a charity bake sale, sat hunched over financial records. Beside him, Iris Blackwell, a private investigator with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing, flipped through photographs and documents with professional detachment. "Your ex-fiancée has been busy," Iris said, sliding a folder across the conference table to Christopher. 3 business partnerships in the last 2 years, all of which ended badly. And by badly, I mean with lawsuits and accusations of embezzlement. Christopher opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read. "She hasn't changed. It gets better," Nathaniel added, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "She owes back taxes to the IRS, has defaulted on 2 business loans, and is currently being investigated by the SEC for possible insider trading." Danica felt a chill run down her spine. "She's not just desperate, she's criminal. Allegedly criminal," Iris corrected with a smile that suggested the distinction was purely technical, but desperate enough to take risks that a smarter person wouldn't take. Christopher's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his jaw tightened. "She's early." "Celeste?" Danica asked. "She's in the lobby. Wants to come up now instead of waiting for this afternoon." Christopher stood up, straightening his tie with mechanical precision. Showtime. 20 minutes later, Celeste Ashford swept into the conference room like she owned the building. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile sharp enough to perform surgery. But Danica, watching carefully, could see the cracks in the facade, the slight tremor in her hands, the too bright gleam in her eyes, the way she held herself like a woman on the edge of either triumph or complete collapse. "Christopher, darling," Celeste purred, settling into the chair across from him as if she'd been invited to a social tea instead of a hostile negotiation. "I hope you've had time to consider my proposal." "I have." Christopher's voice was carefully neutral. "But before we discuss terms, I think there are a few things we need to clear up." Celeste's smile faltered slightly. Such as your current legal troubles with the SEC." The color drained from Celeste's face so quickly that Danica thought she might faint. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Investigation case number SEC 2024-7891, Nathaniel read from his notes with clinical precision. "Suspected insider trading involving Hartwell Industries, Morrison Tech, and at least 3 other companies where you had access to confidential information through personal relationships." That's a misunderstanding," Celeste stammered, but her composure was cracking like ice in spring. "Is it?" Christopher leaned forward, and Danica recognized the predatory focus she'd seen him use to dismember business competitors. What about the embezzlement charges from your partnership with Roland Hendricks, or the fraud allegations from your brief marriage to Senator Whitmore? Celeste's hands were shaking now, all pretense of control abandoned. How did you— The same way I built this company, Christopher said quietly, by being thorough, by investigating before I invest, by knowing exactly who I'm dealing with before I make any deals. You can't prove anything, Celeste said, but her voice lacked conviction. I don't have to prove anything. Christopher slid a thick folder across the table. I just have to make a phone call to the right reporter at the Chicago Tribune. Funny how quickly SEC investigations become front-page news when there's a compelling human interest angle. Celeste stared at the folder like it was a loaded gun. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Christopher's voice was ice-cold. I want you to withdraw whatever threats you think you have against me, or anyone associated with me. I want you to leave Chicago, leave Illinois, and never contact me again. And if I refuse? Christopher's smile was arctic. Then I make that phone call, and tomorrow morning every major newspaper in the country runs a story about your legal troubles, your failed businesses, and your habit of targeting successful men for financial exploitation. I wonder how the SEC will feel about that kind of publicity, accelerating their investigation. The silence in the room was deafening. Celeste looked from Christopher to the folder to the exit, calculating odds that were stacked impossibly against her. "Who you always were, ruthless," she said finally, her voice bitter with defeat. "No," Christopher corrected, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, his voice carried warmth. "I was just finally found something worth protecting." His eyes met Danica's across the table, and she felt her heart skip at the love and pride she saw there. Celeste followed his gaze, her expression twisting with something ugly. "Her? You're doing all this for your little assistant?" "I'm doing this," Christopher said, rising from his chair with lethal grace, "for the woman I love, the woman I'm going to marry, the woman who's taught me that some things are worth fighting for." The words hit Danica like lightning. Marriage. He'd said marriage in front of witnesses, in front of his enemy, as a declaration of war and a promise of forever. Celeste stared at them both, finally seeing what Danica had recognized weeks ago, that whatever Christopher had felt for her years ago was nothing compared to what he felt now. She was fighting a battle she'd already lost. "Fine," she whispered, standing on legs that barely supported her. "You win, but don't expect me to congratulate you on your happiness." "I don't expect anything from you," Christopher replied, "except your absence." Celeste gathered what remained of her dignity and walked toward the door. Just before she reached it, she turned back one last time. "You think you know him," she said to Danica, her voice venomous with spite. "But he'll break your heart eventually. It's what he does." Danica stood up, every inch the powerful woman she'd always been beneath the professional exterior. "Maybe," she said calmly, "but the difference between us is that I'm not afraid of that risk. I'd rather have my heart broken by him than kept safe by anyone else." And as Celeste Ashford walked out of their lives forever, Danica realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's discovering that you were stronger than they ever imagined. The most beautiful moments are born from the ashes of our greatest fears. 3 months had passed since Celeste Ashford had walked out of their lives, taking with her the last remnants of Christopher's past and the final barriers to their future. The autumn had melted into winter, and now, as February painted Chicago in shades of silver and crystal, Danica found herself standing in the elevator of the Meridian Tower at 9 p.m., wondering why Christopher had insisted she come back to the office after their dinner at Chez Laurent. "Trust me," he'd said when she'd questioned the unusual request, his grey eyes sparkling with secrets. "There's something I need to show you." The elevator climbed past the 37th floor, past the floors she knew, continuing upward until it reached a level she'd never visited. When the doors opened, she gasped. The entire rooftop had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Thousands of tiny white lights draped like stars across a canopy that sheltered an intimate space from the February wind. Heaters placed strategically around the perimeter kept the area warm, while soft jazz music floated from hidden speakers. The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly beyond, a glittering testament to dreams made manifest. "Christopher," she breathed, stepping out into the magical space. "How did you—" "I had help," he said, appearing beside her with a smile that was equal parts nervous and triumphant. "Lydia Carver has surprisingly romantic sensibilities For someone who intimidates Fortune 500 CEOs for a living. Danica laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness, the sheer impossibility of this moment. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Christopher moved to face her, taking her hands in his. In the soft light he looked younger, more vulnerable, like the man he might have been if life hadn't taught him that love was dangerous. Danica, these past few months, you've changed everything. You've changed me. Christopher, please, let me say this. His voice was rough with emotion. For 38 years, I believed that success was measured in dollars and market share. That power meant keeping everyone at arm's length. That safety came from never needing anyone enough for them to hurt you. He paused, looking out at the city that sprawled beneath them like a sea of possibilities. And then you walked into my office 3 years ago with your quiet strength and your stubborn optimism, and you proceeded to prove me wrong about everything I thought I knew about myself. Danica felt her breath catch as Christopher dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Even expecting it, even knowing this moment was coming, she felt the world tilt around her. You taught me that dreams aren't illusions. They're blueprints for the life we're brave enough to build. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to truly connect with another soul. You taught me that love isn't destruction. It's creation, transformation, becoming more than we ever imagined we could be alone. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or overwhelming, but perfect in its elegant simplicity, a brilliant diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. Danica Moore, Christopher said, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes. You've spent 3 years organizing my life, managing my chaos, and putting up with my impossible moods. Now I'm asking you to do something even more challenging. What's that? She whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. Marry me. Build an empire with me. Not of money or power, but of love, of partnership, of all the dreams we're brave enough to chase together. His smile was radiant, hopeful, completely unguarded. Will you take on the most difficult client of your career and love me for the rest of our lives? The proposal was so perfectly them, mixing business metaphors with declarations of devotion, acknowledging their history while promising their future. Danica felt laughter and tears war in her chest. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. Yes, of course, yes. Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing and holding each other like they could anchor themselves to this perfect moment. I love you, Christopher murmured against her hair. I love your strength, your compassion, your ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. I love how you make me want to be better than I am. I love you too, Danica replied, pulling back to look at the man who had become her everything. I love your brilliant mind, your hidden tenderness, the way you've learned to fight for us instead of running away. I love how you make me feel like I can conquer the world. We can conquer the world, Christopher corrected, his forehead resting against hers. Together. They stood there under the canopy of lights, holding each other and marveling at how perfectly the ring fit, how perfectly they fit, how a love that had begun with professional antagonism had grown into something that felt eternal. So, Danica said eventually, her voice teasing, does this mean I get a promotion? Christopher laughed, the sound rich with joy. Actually, I was thinking more along the lines of a career change. How do you feel about being co-CEO? Her eyes widened. Christopher, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. We're partners in everything else. Why not in business too? His expression grew tender. Besides, you've been running half this company for 3 years anyway. Time to make it official. What about the board, the shareholders? We'll love the idea once they see our 5-year plan. Christopher's grin was pure mischief. Did I mention that your engagement present is a complete restructuring of corporate hierarchy? Danica shook her head in amazement. You're insane. Insanely in love with you. Good, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him again. Because you're stuck with me now. Forever, Christopher agreed, his voice full of wonder at the word he'd once feared above all others. As midnight approached and the city settled into quiet around them, they danced to music only they could hear, planned a future that exceeded both their wildest dreams, and marveled at how love had transformed 2 wounded souls into something stronger, braver, and more beautiful than either had dared imagine possible. Thank you, Christopher whispered as they swayed together under the Chicago stars. For what? For seeing who I could become before I knew how to be him. For fighting for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. For teaching me that sometimes the greatest risk is the one you don't take. Danica smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst with happiness. Thank you for being worth the risk. And as the city slept below them, and the stars bore witness above, Christopher Hale and Danica Moore began the greatest adventure of their lives, building a love story that would become legend, one perfect moment at a time. Because some fairy tales begin not with once upon a time, but with two people brave enough to believe that happily ever after is just the beginning. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting golden light across the nameplate that still made Danica smile every time she saw it. Danica Hale, co-CEO. The hyphenated surname had been her choice, a bridge between the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. She stood at the window, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her 6-month pregnancy, watching Chicago wake up beneath her. The city looked different from this height, full of possibility and promise, much like her life had become. Admiring your kingdom? Christopher's voice came from behind her, warm with the kind of contentment that had replaced his old sarcasm. She turned to find him in the doorway of their shared office space, a revolutionary concept that had raised eyebrows among the board until they'd seen the results. In 2 years, Hale Enterprises had tripled its revenue, expanded into 3 new markets, and been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as the future of corporate leadership. Our kingdom, she corrected, moving into his arms with the easy grace of a woman completely comfortable in her own power. And I was thinking about Lydia's retirement party tonight. She's going to cry when she sees the surprise we have planned. Christopher chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The woman who once made a competitor weep during a board meeting? I doubt it. You'd be surprised what people do when they feel truly appreciated. Danica leaned back against his chest, feeling their baby kick in response to his father's proximity. Speaking of which, the Morrison account sent flowers to congratulate us on the pregnancy. Apparently, happiness is good for business relationships. Who knew? Christopher's hand joined hers on her belly, his voice soft with wonder. How are you feeling today? Powerful, grateful, slightly terrified that we're going to be responsible for a tiny human who will probably inherit your stubborn streak and my inability to back down from a challenge. God help us all, Christopher murmured, but his eyes were bright with anticipation. A gentle knock interrupted them. Sorry to disturb, came Lydia's voice from the doorway, but the team from Meridian Youth Foundation is here for the 10 o'clock meeting. Danica straightened, slipping into her professional mode with practiced ease. The foundation had been her idea, a program to provide business mentorship and internships for underprivileged high school students in Chicago. What had started as a small initiative had grown into something that changed dozens of lives each year. Send them to conference room A, she said. We'll be right there. As Lydia departed, Christopher caught Danica's hand. Before we go face the next generation of world changers, I have something for you. He pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. Danica raised an eyebrow. It's not my birthday. It's not our anniversary. It's not any holiday I'm aware of. It's Tuesday, Christopher said simply. And I love you. Apparently that's reason enough. She unwrapped the gift to find a leather-bound journal, simple and elegant. Inside the front cover, written in Christopher's precise handwriting, were the words, "For the dreams we're still brave enough to chase. Your impossible client and devoted husband, Christopher," she breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness of it. I know you've been thinking about writing a book, about leadership, about breaking barriers, about building something meaningful in the corporate world. This seemed like the right time to start. Danica felt tears prick her eyes, pregnancy hormones making her more emotional than usual, but also genuine gratitude for a man who saw her dreams as clearly as his own. Have I mentioned lately that I love you beyond all reason? Not since this morning, Christopher replied, his smile the same one that had made her fall in love with him. But I never get tired of hearing it. An hour later, they sat across from 12 bright-eyed teenagers, listening to business proposals that ranged from brilliant to charmingly naive. Danica watched Christopher interact with a 17-year-old named Zara, who reminded her of herself at that age, ambitious, determined, and slightly intimidated by the corporate world she wanted to conquer. The key, Christopher was saying, is to remember that every person in business is just a person. They have fears, hopes, dreams, and bad days just like you do. When you stop seeing them as obstacles and start seeing them as potential allies, everything changes. It was a lesson he'd learned the hard way, and one that Danica had taught him by example. She reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it gently. As the meeting concluded and the students filed out, chattering excitedly about their next steps, Lydia lingered behind. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I first met you 3 years ago, Danica, I thought you were wasting your talents playing assistant to Chicago's most difficult CEO. I'm glad to have been proven wrong." "You weren't wrong," Danica said softly. "I was wasting my talents. I just didn't realize that sometimes we have to wade through the wrong dreams to find the right ones." "And sometimes," Christopher added, his arm sliding around his wife's shoulders, "the right dreams are bigger than anything we dared imagine alone." That evening, at Lydia's retirement celebration, Danica stood before a room full of colleagues, competitors, and friends to deliver a toast that would be quoted in business journals for years to come. "Lydia Carver taught me that success isn't about reaching the top of someone else's ladder. It's about building your own ladder, tall enough to lift others as you climb. She showed me that the most revolutionary thing a woman can do in business is to be herself, completely and unapologetically. And she proved that mentorship isn't just about sharing knowledge. It's about believing in someone's potential before they believe in it themselves." As applause filled the room, Danica felt the baby kick again, as if agreeing with her words. She caught Christopher's eye across the crowd and saw in his expression everything she needed to know about their future. It was bright, challenging, and full of love. Later, as they stood together on the same rooftop where he'd proposed, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars, Christopher spoke the words that had become their evening ritual. "What are you grateful for today, Mrs. Hale?" "For second chances," Danica replied without hesitation. "For dreams that evolve. For love that transforms us into better versions of ourselves. For you." "And what are you excited about for tomorrow?" She placed her hand over his on her belly, feeling their child respond to the warmth of his touch. "For the adventure of raising a little person who will probably challenge every assumption we have about leadership, love, and what it means to build something that matters. Think they'll be as stubborn as their parents?" "I'm counting on it," Danica laughed. "The world needs more people who are stubborn enough to believe that impossible things are just possibilities, waiting for the right moment." As they headed inside, Christopher paused at the threshold, looking back at the city that had been witness to their transformation. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up the chance to build your own company from scratch?" Danica followed his gaze to the sprawling metropolis below, then looked at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "I didn't give up building my own company," she said softly. "I just discovered that the best enterprises are built with the people you love." And as they walked toward their future together, hand in hand, heart to heart, dream to dream, the Chicago skyline stood as a testament to what was possible when two souls brave enough to love and stubborn enough to fight for that love decided to build something beautiful together. Some stories end with happily ever after, but the best stories, they end with happily ever after, and this is just the beginning. Size, would you have the courage to love someone who could transform your entire world? What lessons about leadership and love resonated most with you from Danica and Christopher's journey? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.